To my knowledge, there's hardly any third-person shooters on the PC that allows you to fly around with the jetpack. Considering I'm not a complete fucking tool, I won't be playing Anthem. So, in the meantime, I'm stuck with Dark Void. Dark Void was released in 2010 by Airtight Games and published by Capcom. This was the studio's first game. Airtight Games was founded in 2004 in America and then went defunct in 2014. Their last game was Murdered Soul Suspect, as they would close down about a month after that release. Apparently Dark Void is supposed to have games for Windows Live, but that's not a thing anymore. It still has a key activation system that you need to use regardless. The game was created on the Unreal Engine 3 and was released for the PC, PS3 and the Xbox 360. There's also 2 patches for the physics software supported for the game. I've installed those as well. The game is somewhat unstable. It crashed a couple of times when I tried to make it full screen, as it started off in a windowed mode when it launched. Eventually, out of sheer stubbornness and luck, I got it working in full screen. It also crashed a couple of times in game. Considering the game relies on a checkpoint system, having multiple crashes will most likely set you back in progress. The only other issue I had while playing was some occasional stuttering, usually when it loaded a new checkpoint. Dark Void is a third-person shooter with aerial combat to freshen up the gameplay. In the very first minutes of starting the game, something comes up very clearly. The controls are really clunky. Despite being able to maneuver rather smoothly, it still feels somewhat weird and takes a while getting used to, but flying is quite fun. The best part of Dark Void is when you're given the ability to fly around. Although somewhat clunky, it's incredibly fun, albeit with a few adjustments for the sensitivity in the control options. The weapons are a varied mix, but they do differentiate themselves from each other, which gives the player the choice of picking whatever gun that suits them the most. It's questionable how reliable most of the weapons are. You're most likely going to use one of the machine guns in the game. You have an upgrade system where you have to gather tech points from the enemies or from the secrets scattered around the levels, which further incentivizes the player to pick 2 or 3 weapons and sticking with those as you want to focus on upgrading them. However, you're able to just go back and replay previous levels. This essentially allows you to get more upgrade points, so in a way you can grind the missions to level everything up. Sometimes when you kill bigger enemies, you'll have the option to pick up their weapons, which are highly effective, but have limited count of ammunition and will slow you in the movement. But for some reason, one of the most powerful tools at your disposal is your fists, as most enemies die in 1 or 2 hits, resulting in the weapons being used less. As mentioned before, there are secrets in the game. These are found by exploring the levels by diverting from the quite linear paths. Despite the levels looking rather open, they're still incredibly linear and closed in, even in the flying levels. These secrets consist of large quantities of tech points and journals. The set journals can only be read from the main menu of the game, making them more or less forgettable as they don't feel like a part of the rest of the game. Throughout the missions, you're introduced to various interesting gameplay elements. For example, in multiple areas, you either have to ascend or descend platforms, combating the enemies along the way. Whenever these elements occurs, there will usually be enemies thrown at the player. This is fairly unique, and I haven't seen another game do this. While it is a bit disorienting at times, you get used to it quite quickly, and the camera can also be a bit wonky in this mode as well. The camera in general is quite close to the character, meaning that sometimes it can be obstructed by various things. But it overall does a good job at adapting to your movement and changes from cover to cover. When you eventually get the jetpack, platforming sections along the way becomes easier, but still fun. The first version of the jetpack merely gives you a jump boost that also introduces being able to ascend platforms, whereas before you were only able to descend said platforms. In general, if you don't know where to go, looking up or down will usually provide you with a way to go. The game shines the most when it uses its elements, as it broadens up the gameplay, more than a generic cover-based shooter. Even the times when the game becomes a generic cover-based shooter, the key is to move around more than stay in cover. Funny enough, while movement is key, and being able to traverse freely, falling from almost any height kills you. Sometimes you'll get stuck on obstacles, resulting in you either not being able to move, or you having to wiggle yourself out of the ordeal. Throughout missions, you'll have to walk along other NPCs, without anything happen, until you reach an area where a cutscene will start. The bigger problem here is that you're walking faster than the NPCs moving, meaning that you have to wait on the NPCs a couple of times. The AI isn't the smartest, and will a lot of times just stand in the opening or charge the player, allowing the player to riddle them with bullets, or in my case, punch the fuck out of them, which works for the most of the times when the enemies don't decide to blow themselves up. There is a decent variety of enemies that each have their own advantages and disadvantages. For example, you have the standard robot that uses a high-tech version of your machine gun, and is usually following the player in large groups. On the other hand, you have a heavier, more beefy robot that uses one of the more lethal guns in the game and has more health. The game is in general pretty easy, except those few times where it does a 180 and puts you up against unfair odds. For example, at a certain point, you have to defeat 3 enemies called Archons. You have to do this before they take down the structure you're defending. But it just seems poorly designed, as you never have enough ammo to defeat all 3 before the structure's health is removed completely. The issue isn't that the enemies are hard to kill, but the fact that the structure's health drops at an insane rate. When I looked up this session, where a lot of other people had problems, there was this reoccurring thing people said, that if you were to die enough times, the health of the structure would be quote-unquote glitch out, meaning that you could take time defeating said enemies. The last boss fight was easy though, and leaves you with one of the most unsatisfying endings, as it feels rushed and leaves you with a lot of questions about the plot the game has set up throughout the story. Perhaps it was potentially setting up for a sequel, but we'll never know.